so we are talking today about digital cameras. I'm always grateful for Susan to be here with me because she helps me out with a few tips for you on digital cameras, especially when it comes to a type of camera we're going to talk about today that she uses, that she has had some great success with. So we'll talk about all the different options out there. So if you are in the market for a new digital camera, hopefully this will give you the information you need to make a smart buy. All right, so we'll understand the objectives for you for coming out of this class are understanding basic camera and lens terminology, knowing the different types of digital cameras and lenses that are out there, and ultimately you can shop for a camera that best suits your needs and budget. Okay, so let's just talk about the different types of cameras that are available to consumers. Number one, there are your trusty old point and shoots. These are also known as compact cameras. They're very small and lightweight, and they come with a flash built in, as well as a zoom lens to help you zoom in a little bit on something. And they're very easy to use. They literally are pointing and shooting. But then you also have some that are a little more advanced. It's a compact zoom. It has a more powerful zoom lens. So you get a little greater magnification when you're trying to capture a picture of something that's off in the distance a little more than you might like otherwise. And then there are advanced compact cameras, and these are also known as bridge cameras. This is a great way to avoid major investment in a lot of camera equipment, like lenses, different types of lenses. This includes a lot of the same features that you would get with a higher end DSLR camera, and I will talk about what I mean by DSLRs in a second. But you have manual exposure and focusing, as well as some automatic settings, but they're lightweight and they're user friendly. I am going to let Susan talk a little bit about hers because she is a bridge camera user and actually switched from a DSLR.
I did switch, and the main reason that I had for switching to begin with was weight, because the DSLR, I use my camera a lot for travel photography, and carrying around a DSLR and the accompanying lenses and accessories that I needed for that camera all day long when I was on a trip, you know, 1 or 2 hours, okay. If you've got a car, okay. But if you're walking around a city in a foreign country for 8 hours, carrying, 9 or 10 pounds of camera gear, for a person my size, it wasn't working. I was exhausted at the end of the day. I was ready to pitch the camera in the garbage can. I didn't want to carry it anymore. So I decided to try one of these bridge cameras. This is the one I chose. There are other manufacturers. I actually have the Sony covered up on this with gaffer tape right now. They say for trips to a foreign country, and I'm getting, I don't know why it's not showing as well. Let's see if I can turn my
Scott,
background.
Can you spotlight Susan?
Actually, that's a great idea. Kevin, can you go ahead and spotlight Susan and me?
Yeah, okay. Much better. Thank you.
Okay, there we go.
Okay, and I'm going to see if I can turn my background off because it's blurring my camera. There I go. Okay. All right. So I have the Sony blacked out right now, but this is a Sony RX10 Mark IV camera. It is this lens is a Zeiss lens. It's a 24 to 600 millimeter zoom, which if you look at a regular 600 millimeter zoom for a DSLR, they're huge. They weigh about 10 or 15 pounds, just the lens, and they're, a couple of feet long, and they're very, very expensive. but this camera includes a 600 millimeter equivalent lens. It's a smaller sensor. So it's not a full frame camera, but it takes very nice pictures. It does everything. I can shoot fully manual. It has all of the selections on it that a DSLR or an ILMC has. And I found very few things that this camera won't do that that the higher end cameras will do. I mean, there are a few things, but not very many that this camera won't do. And for travel, Scott, for your trip, it would be perfect.
Yes,
because
I know.
you know you wouldn't need to carry extra lenses. You would have them all right here with you. And so I'm very, very happy. I'm a happy camper with this particular camera. It is it takes, you know, it takes very nice pictures. I know you're going to talk about the telephones, and the telephones are getting to the point where they take nice pictures also, but this one still has some advantages over cell phone cameras. So for a person who has an interest in photography and wants to do, you know, type of photography that I want to do, this is my best choice right now. In
Susan,
the future,
what's
there
the
may
price? What's the price range on this camera?
Well, these are not inexpensive cameras, but I think they're selling. You'd have to check. I check B&H Photo right now on the price they're selling these for, but I think I paid around $1,700 or $1,800 for this camera. So it wasn't cheap, but it wasn't like $3,500 that some of the ILMCs nowadays cost. Plus, that's just the camera, and then you pay extra for the lenses for the camera. Okay.
Yeah.
So other than manual settings, Susan, and do you feel just the quality? I mean, you're already a good photographer, so I kind of wonder for those of us who are kind of mediocre, you know, I feel like a good photographer could get a picture out of an iPhone. But what other
absolutely.
than manual setting are you getting that you feel is worth it?
I think people, I mean, you can get really good pictures with a point and shoot, with an iPhone, with just about any kind of digital camera you buy today, wouldn't you say, Scott? I mean, it's not, it's not a function of, but if you want to do, if you want to be able to control your shooting really, really well, then you'll want a camera that will allow you to do that with ease. I mean, that's not to say that you can't do that with an iPhone or a cell phone app or something like that. But I just, my own personal experience, I like to have a viewfinder that I can look through, so I don't have to worry about having backwards problems here. I don't have to worry about the sun being a problem looking at a screen to decide what my view is. This is an electronic viewfinder, so it doesn't have a mirror like the DSLRs have. I'm looking right at, you know, more or less what I'm going to shoot. And I like to be able to have an aperture control or a aperture priority or shutter priority if I want it, or full manual if I want it. I can use this has a macro feature, but it's not a macro lens, but I can use a diopter and come pretty close to what a macro lens will do with this camera. I can also, it's just easier for me to control the settings that I want, to blur the backgrounds really easily. I know how to do that. I can use it has nice video. In fact, this camera is used by some professional videographers. It has that good a video quality to it. It's got it in the camera, just like with the iPhone. It's got a panoramic capability, so I can shoot panoramas here. It has an in-camera HDR, just like the iPhone. So it's got all of the settings that I want to use as a photographer. For someone who's learning photography, if you really want to learn how to use a camera, you know, you've got to get a camera that you can manipulate the settings on. iPhones are great if all you ever want to do is just point and shoot.
Mhm.
And a lot of people,
Comment?
that's all they ever want to do. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Fred's been eager to chime in here. So
Yeah.
go ahead, Fred.
Yeah, well, I want to comment, and my comment is, I mean, that's a beautiful camera, and I know there's some people here that are probably starting out, and I want to put a plug in for Canon PowerShot cameras. PowerShot, the one I have is actually several years old, but it's the PowerShot SX50 HS. These cameras are about $500. The one I have has, I'm not going to say it's got every feature that Susan has, and I would, if I had to make a guess, I'd say the reason it's so expensive because it's got a real high quality lens. That's what makes cameras expensive. Real high quality. A Zeiss lens. That lens probably costs, the biggest bulk of that camera is probably the cost in the lens. But the Canon, I'll tell you, this Canon is really a great camera. It weighs like 600 grams, so more than a pound. But it's got 50x optical zoom, and I like macro and I like zoom. So my new phone does my macro, but I like zoom lens too. This has got a 50x optical zoom with image stabilization. I mean, I can hold this thing and take a picture of something like 2 blocks away and get a pretty good shot. It's really amazing. So that's the weakness in a phone. You just don't have any range at all with a phone.
Right.
And if you just want to take snapshots of the family standing in front of the church or something, it's okay. But most people, the time comes when you want to shoot over the top of a crowd, or you want to make a real close shot of a cathedral and there's a gargoyle up there and you want that close shot. That isn't going to happen with your telephone. So I would say to people, look up the PowerShot SX series, and that would be a good starting point for somebody that wants a camera that's got full automatic, but it's also got what we call aperture preferred options. So you can operate it manually, but then it's also got programs for people that are starting out, where if you can set it for night shots or sports. It's got all kinds of automatic settings too. So it's the best. It's a nice combination of both. And I'm sure that, Susan's camera has all those features too. But that's just another price range for people that maybe aren't quite ready to, go to that level. I've been very happy with this. I've had it for several years, and it works just as good as it always does.
I just want to say, Fred, that the weight sounds good to me. Susan, that your camera looks large. How much does it weigh?
It weighs about 3.5 pounds, which is a lot less than the 7 to 9 pounds that I was carrying with my DSLR. So to me, this was an improvement. But the much smaller cameras.
Looks like Susan froze up.
Yeah, like mine is a pound is 450 grams, so mine is over, a little over a pound.
Right.
So there's a big, if weight is an issue, it's like you say, when you're carrying a camera bag with a whole bunch of interchangeable lenses, we know what that's about. But this camera that weighs not too much over 1 pound has tremendous amount of capability. That's my point. And a $500 price range.
You've made a good point, Fred, in that it's really important to understand what you want to use the camera for, because for instance, let me describe, and Scott's heard this story multiple times, but I went on a trip before the pandemic. My daughter and I went on a trip to India, and we went to a national park, in India where there were predator animals. So we had to go with a guide. The guides were very experienced at taking us around, and we saw leopards and we saw tiger. And there were some other people with us, and some of these people had, real high-end Nikon Canons, whatever, with nice lenses. And the tiger was so far away that they could not get a clear shot of the tiger. And with this camera, I got a clear shot of the tiger because it had a 600 millimeter equivalent lens on it. And they were carrying, 300 or 400 millimeter equivalent, or 300 or 400 millimeter lenses, which were great big lenses. And
They're
I got
heavy
the best
too.
shot.
Well, not only that, I mean, I've been on photo safaris and you get people that there's no limit to how much money they got,
Oh, yeah,
but they can't get
exactly.
those lenses changed fast enough in a changing situation to take pictures of the animal. It's one thing if you're at the zoo and the animal's standing there and you can set up your tripod, but when you're out on a safari and the van is bumping along, and then all of a sudden, like you say, out in the distance, you see an animal you want to shoot. By the time the people get their camera set up, the animal's gone.
Right. Yeah.
So again, it depends on what it is you're looking to do.
It does, because for me it was a trade-off of weight and the lens I wanted. So that's why I chose this one rather than a smaller camera. I could have gotten less weight, but then I would not have gotten the lens that I wanted. So this was my best option for all of the things that I wanted.
Yeah.
In addition, one other thing to think about, depending on where you're going, if you're going to the beach, if you're going someplace where there's wind, dust blowing, a camera that has an attached lens that doesn't come off can be a benefit, because if you're changing lenses and you're in a situation where you've got lots of sand or blowing dust, you're going to have a problem with dirtying your sensor. And then you've got a real problem, because then you're going to have to clean your sensor. So, I mean, there's lots of things to think about: where you want to go, what you want to do with the camera, how much you want to pay for it, the weight you want to carry, lots of questions to ask yourself.
Exactly.
Right. Yes, Co.
Yes. So Fred, your lens is fixed camera, so you can't do multiple lens replacement.
It is not an interchangeable lens, and neither is Susan's.
Right.
And that's what we're talking about, is making the decision to not have to deal with a whole basket full of lenses that cost like $500 a piece, and then have to change, or more, and then have to change them as you go along, as opposed to having a camera. This camera's got a 1200 millimeter lens zoom. That's 50 to 1 optical. I mean, I can, like you say, if you saw this, if you looked through this, you would just be amazed. And it has image stabilization. So to take a long shot handheld, in the old days, that would just be impossible. You'd have to have a tripod and a automatic release and all that kind of stuff. You just couldn't do it. But these cameras, because they have fast lenses and image stabilization, they're quite amazing.
Yeah.
So Susan, with your camera, you cannot take your lens off and put a different one on.
I cannot. No, it's the lens is attached to the camera, but it's it's a pretty large zoom range for a camera when you're going, and this is a full frame 35 millimeter equivalent, 24 millimeters, which is a pretty good wide angle lens to 600 millimeter zoom. And again, that's optical. And then I can also set this camera so that I can get 1200 millimeter or even 3 times 3600
digital zoom.
1800 millimeter digital zoom. But I see no benefit in that, because if I take 600 millimeter optical, then if I need to, I can crop the picture and get the equivalent of a 1200 millimeter, whatever. I can by cropping. I mean, it's the same. Cropping is really kind of the same thing as a digital zoom, but
Right.
so yeah, it's just, there are all sorts of trade-offs. You're not going to find a camera that does everything, that has everything, but you can, kind of figure out what your needs are and then just narrow it down by doing that.
My
So
guess, probably the other difference, if I had to make a guess with Susan's camera, it probably has a bigger sensor, and it
Yeah.
probably takes a larger image size. And my guess is that this camera that I have does not shoot RAW.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Pretty sure it does not. Again,
Yeah.
for most people that are, casual photographers, RAW is not that important. But for people that are more serious, it is. So that would be a decision somebody would have to make.
Right.
Yeah, and I shoot in RAW and JPEG when I'm shooting, so I get both.
Yeah.
Well,
And
question.
another thing about this camera too, I haven't done too much video photography with it, but like I said, there are videographers, professional videographers who use this camera. And another benefit that this camera has that some other even higher end cameras don't when you're taking video is it will take, like if you're taking a video and you see something that you want to get a still shot of while you're taking the video, you can take still shots while you're also taking video with this
Oh,
camera.
wow. Okay.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think
So-
mine does that also.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So question for both of you. So if you have your lens cranked wide open at maximum distance, so what's the picture quality like? I mean, are you satisfied with the picture quality that you get, or is it kind of pixelated and looks grainy, or what exactly, when you push it to its limits, what do you get as far as the picture quality?
I mean, I think the picture quality on this camera that I have, are you talking about when it's at 600 millimeters, when I have it out that far?
Yes,
The
ma'am.
picture quality, the picture quality is good. I mean, it's a good optical zoom. The Zeiss
Yeah.
lenses are really good lenses. I've never been disappointed with the picture quality. I can raise the ISO pretty high on this camera too and still get good shots. In fact, I took a picture of the lunar eclipse the other night. I think I had it finally. I took a picture at 6400 ISO, and it was a little bit grainy, so I stepped it back down to 800 ISO and got a pretty good shot of the moon. And when it was in full eclipse, which is pretty dark, and
Yeah.
even at 800 ISO. So yeah.
And
it was.
Oh, go ahead, Susan. Did she freeze
lost
up?
I just have a quick question,
Audio.
and my question is actually more just about the web and the class. Does anybody else hear a buzzing every like 5 seconds?
I
Yeah,
am
I'm
not.
hearing it.
I'm going to mute
I mean-
myself and see if it's coming from me.
Okay.
Okay, because I might have to go insane otherwise.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll do our best to avoid that, but there's I think we lost Susan for a minute, but it looks like she's back. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I don't know.
Okay. Well, we were talking about sensor size and interchangeable lenses and things like that. So let me talk a little bit about that. Okay. If you go up from a bridge camera, that's when you get into these DSLRs, and they're seen as ideal for serious hobbyists. But I think the bridge cameras are getting so sophisticated in their capabilities that you may do very well with that. The benefit of those bridge cameras is that you don't have to worry about changing lenses, as we've just been discussing, whereas with this you would. And I have several lenses that do different things. There are also a variety of settings and manual controls. This is just the anatomy of a DSLR. You'll notice here I've got a mode dial. Some of these are automatic settings. Some of these would be the manual. The lens release is right there. So that's where you could release one lens and insert another. You've got a place for a flash, and there's your shutter button. And the way that these have worked is the standard way is that you've got a lens that focuses on the subject, and then the shutter opens to admit light. And there is a mirror in the camera that reflects light from that lens, from the lens into a viewfinder, the viewfinder where you're looking at what you're trying to shoot. And the image sensor in the camera reacts to that light. And then the image is recorded on a memory card. It used to be recorded, of course, on film. Now we just have tiny memory cards that fit in there. That is unlike some of the other cameras, especially those point and shoot cameras. Those are mirrorless cameras too. Your smartphone is a mirrorless camera. They don't have this type of system set up within them. What can be a key factor, though, is the size of that image sensor, because the larger the sensor, the more light it's capturing, and the higher quality or resolution of a picture it can capture. And that would be important if you are creating a museum size image. You may really need a high-end DSLR to achieve that versus a smaller a bridge camera or a point and shoot camera. But how many of us are really planning on having our photos on display in a gallery of some sort? And I have learned that one of our GetSetUp members took a photo with a iPhone and got her photo blown up in size and displayed in a gallery. So you really have to think hard about whether you want to make this kind of investment. So when we're talking about the sensor, we are talking about what captures the light entering the camera through the lens. And then there's the shutter on the camera. That's the mechanism that controls the duration of the light that hits the sensor. So you've got several, these are just some shutter speed examples. And depending on the shutter speed you're using, you'll get different types of photos or different types of results. And some are ideal for certain situations over others. If you're using a shutter speed of a second or more, that's great for night shooting, low light shooting. Sometimes I'll use that if I want to get a long exposure of like water. If you've ever seen really nice pictures of waterfalls during the day, you might see that the water is kind of blurry while everything else is in really sharp focus. That's when I might use a slower shutter speed. Now, with that, you need sometimes to use special filters that go over your lens to be able to do that in bright daylight. So that's another thing to consider, is there are these filters you may have to use. If you go, this is kind of mid-range of 50th to 100th of a second. That tends to be fairly typical. If you're doing something where you're really trying to capture something that's moving very fast, it might be upwards of 1/1000th to 1/4000th of a second. So those are just some examples. And then you have the aperture, also known as the f-stop, and that is the size of the opening that lets light in. So if you look here at how this works, it's a little confusing because you sometimes hear aperture, you sometimes hear your f-stop. But if you think of it in these terms, which is what I typically have to do because I still get confused by it, is the lower the number here on these f-stops, the wider the hole here for the light to be coming in. Okay. So Just to give you an example, I laugh, Susan and I laugh because we have this love affair with F22. F22 is a great way at night to get sort of a starlight effect on street lights and other types of light. So she showed me some photos that were shot with F22 that got that effect, but you'll get different results depending on what f-stop you're using. And then you have the ISO, which refers to the sensitivity of the camera's sensor. And that can range from 100 up to well over 1200. Now, in the old days of film camera, ISO referred to the speed of the film, and 800 or sensitivity of the film. 800 was about the max that you could go. At least that's what the highest speed I could find. And that I would use for low light situations. So if I was doing night photography, I might go with 800 ISO film. Today, you can just do that all automatically in the DSLR. And so sometimes you can even automate that ISO so that the camera will sense what it needs to choose for the ISO and will use it that way. But that will sort of control the lighting as well coming into the camera. A higher number helps capture low light shots, as I said, but that can also create a lot of noise or visual distortion in the picture. It gets a little grainier. You may have seen instances like that. So what this all means is all of this is working together. I know it's a lot to drink in here, but the aperture setting, the shutter speed, and the ISO all work to determine the result of that shot you take. Here are a couple of examples. Here's one I took with an older digital camera I had in New Mexico. And I had a relatively medium level f-stop, like an f10. And then my ISO was at 100. And I shot that with a shutter speed of 1/200th of a second. Here you'll see it was 1.8. And I'm getting a little bit of a different effect. I'm getting this nice blurry background. I also used a different lens for this, but just to give you an example of the different results you might get based on the camera settings, the lens, and so forth.
And what you're talking about there, that's sometimes called the exposure triangle, the ISO, the aperture, and the shutter speed, because those things are all interrelated. You change one and you're going to change the others.
Correct. Yeah.
Or yeah.
Sometimes the speed is the most important thing because it's action. Sometimes it's
we are
Uh-oh.
talking. Beg your pardon?
I lost you for a minute. Carry on. Sorry.
Okay, sorry about that. We're having storms here, so maybe that's hitting my internet connection. I don't know. But we're really, when I say mirrorless, we really are talking about those ILMCs. Because as I said, some of the point and shoots and even your smartphone camera are technically mirrorless as well. But here these offer most of the features of a DSLR, but they they lack that internal reflex mirror. So that allows them to become a little lighter weight because that mirror isn't in there. So the light is passing through the lens directly to the sensor. So that creates a live adjustable preview of your image in your viewfinder. It's more what you see is what you're going to get. And you can adjust that as you're looking in that viewfinder, and that's most likely what you're going to capture. It's a little bit more unpredictable with a DSLR.
Yeah,
And
and when that mirror flips up and down, that's a mechanical issue that you can have over the long haul.
yeah, because of the shaking, Fred, or
Well, that or it's just mechanically the mirror is moving.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Because you
Yeah,
don't
and
have that mirror or anything like that, you have that it's less prone to shaking, so there's more image stabilization, and these are more compact and they're also lightweight. I'm sorry,
yeah,
Susan, you were going to say something?
well, yeah, I mean, the function of the mirror is to allow you to have an optical view of what is coming through the lens, and that's why it has to move up out of the way for the light then to hit the sensor in order for it to record the image. With the mirrorless camera like this, you're not getting an optical view of what's coming through the lens. You're getting an electronic view of what's coming through the lens. So it's slightly different, but very, very close, really.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
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 And that goes back to when we were shooting film. I mean, that was true
Yeah.
with film, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
We used to have film with a mirror in front of it that would flip up and down, and they could be
Right.
quite noisy too. If you're, you know, shooting at somebody's wedding and you have that SLR and the thing goes clunk clunk every time you
Yeah.
take a picture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, mirrorless cameras really are silent. You
Yeah,
can't
that's
hear the
right.
shutter clicking. They can put sort of a sound in there that allows you to think you're hearing a shutter clicking, but you really don't hear it. It's just
That's right.
and you can run it on silent. Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. Some of the drawbacks of these are that they are considerably more expensive, and they have a shorter battery life too. Now, I'm sure over time all of that is going to improve, not necessarily the price, but at least the battery life. You know, that they've improved those in smartphones. I'm sure they will in something like this as well. And then you have the lenses if you're going to use a DSLR or even a mirrorless camera, and they can take all kinds of shapes and have different focal points, or focal lengths, I should say. And they look something like this, with zoom rings and a focus ring and so forth. And you have just some examples. A standard lens, which usually has a focal length usually between 35 to 85 millimeters. Telephoto, which can allow you, typically for the most affordable ones, you're probably going to get something that can go 250 to 300 millimeters. So I'm trying to think of a good illustration of how far that would be. But you know, you're going to be able to zoom in quite from something that's a pretty good distance from you, but it's nothing like what Susan talked about with 600 or what Fred talked about with 1200. And again, they are not using a different lens to do that. It's all built in one lens. You also have the wide angle lens, which fits a large area into your frame. That's ideal for landscapes. The fisheye lens will do kind of a weird fisheye type effect to the photo. It'll sort of make it look almost like you're looking at a circular version of the world or a global version. And then the macro is designed to take magnified shots of subjects that are usually very close to you. Macro photos you might see as big photos of insects. So you would see a macro photo of a bee, you'd be able to see the bee's eyes, the fuzzy hair, the hair around its abdomen and the wings and so forth, really up close. So let's talk about making a decision on selecting a camera. And I do see there was a question in the chat about, you know, what is the advantage of a digital camera versus a camera on the cell phone? One thing is the sensor size. And so you aren't going to get the same sensor size in a smartphone right now. They still take great pictures. But that's something to consider depending on what you want to do with your photos. If you want to really have them enlarged and maybe hung on your wall, sometimes that could be a factor. But here are some things to consider before you buy. One is to just read a lot of product reviews. And you can go to places like B&H Photo or any kind of photography online magazine. Just Google for reviews on different cameras. I'll have some links in the class notes for you to help you get started doing that. But that's a good way just to see what the experts are saying about the cameras that are rolling out on the market or are already there. Also, image quality that's better than your smartphone camera. If you're not all that worried about that image quality, and that's where the sensor size can come into play. You're going to get more light coming in just because there's a bigger sensor. Sometimes cameras will do better with megapixels than what a smartphone will do. But you can do some pretty amazing things, and we've seen that in some of the photography groups with an iPhone or a Samsung phone. And then the size and weight that suit your habits and activities. You heard from Susan, that was a critical decision for her, is what she wanted to lug around for the type of photography that she does, which is a lot. There's a lot of travel photography. Is it really worth weighing yourself down with all that equipment when you can do something, get this pretty much the same quality photos for personal use, essentially, with something that's a lot easier to carry. And the type of pictures you'd like to take. If you're going to want to do a lot of macro shots, if you're going to want to do things like fisheye effects, that might mean you're going to need something with that where you can switch out lenses, a DSLR. And also just the features you're likely to use a lot. If maybe you're going to want to try a macro lens out once and then you'll forget about it, it's really not worth the investment, especially since the newer smartphones, at least the iPhone, they do have a macro function on there or a macro setting on there. I know Fred's been using that a lot. So you can take macro shots now with an iPhone. And I would imagine when they roll out the iPhone 14, there'll be other features on there that heretofore did not exist in a smartphone. You also have to consider, if you're going with a DSLR, the availability of lenses and other accessories that fit your budget. You're going to be needing possibly, most likely, a tripod, because you're going to need to stabilize that camera quite often when you are taking shots at night. That's going to require a longer exposure, and DSLRs are very unfortunately, they will pick up even the slightest movement in your hands. And most of us, whether we know it or not, we're making micro movements. Those get picked up, and it gives you more of a shaky or blurry image than what you would like. So that's why people use tripods to really steady that camera. That's something you have to invest in. And to get a really sturdy tripod can cost you, a couple of $100 at least. So that is something to consider. And then the lenses, the more you want to get into photography, the more you may be looking at spending on different lenses, and they can get expensive too. Some of them get up into, thousands of dollars. So here are just some brands out there. I know Fred mentioned the PowerShot series. Panasonic has the Lumix, the Sony CyberShot, and Nikon Coolpix is a popular one. I know a lot of people who are using that. There are some adventure cameras that are waterproof, so you can use them. GoPro is one of them, although I think a lot of people use those to take video. but these are a couple of other brands that are highly rated. The DSLRs, if you're getting started, the Canon Rebel series is a good place to start, or with the Nikon, it's the D series, and Pentax and Sony also have some sort of entry-level DSLR series. All right, yeah, you also have some of these are just some great places to look for cameras and camera equipment. I'll list them in the class notes as well. So here are some key takeaways. Point and shoot compact cameras are lightweight, easy to use. Some have more powerful zoom lenses. You've got the DSLR cameras and the bridge cameras for serious hobbyists. And the DSLRs include mounts for interchangeable lenses, and they offer a variety of settings and manual controls. Mirrorless cameras, or the ILMCs, are becoming more popular. They're lightweight, they capture sharper images, supposedly, although there's some disagreement even about that, and they're pricey. So that would be if you're really going to get serious about photography. And then ultimately, I think you should think about selecting a camera that includes features you're certain you'll use and will give you photos that you're going to be happy with. Okay. All right.